take home the golden gloves, you've got to put in the work, and you've got to be tough as nails. Ashley Kalis was driven to achieve. Today, Kalis is still fueled by that same hope, grit, and determination. A mother of 3 school-aged boys and successful business owner who ran testing and vaccination sites across the state. Kalis is the fighter Rhode Island needs right now because it's time for a change. Ashley Kalis for governor.
Good evening. Welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Dr. Rabil. He is an expert on the Levant and the Middle East. He's written multiple books about Syria, Lebanon, and the various issues, and we'll be discussing this region in light of the shifting security framework, latest developments, Biden's visit to the region, Lebanon's efforts to resolve a maritime border dispute with Israel, and other regional security developments and shifting alliances. Dr. Rabil, welcome to the Washington Outsider. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your work for the audience?
Thank you very much for having me, Irina. It's a pleasure to be with you. Well, I was born in Lebanon, and I went to school there, and then I served in the Red Cross. You had a civil war there, and I didn't want to participate in anybody's camp, so I joined the Red Cross, and I became the chief of the emergency of the Red Cross in East Beirut. And then after a while, I came to the United States in 1984. My grandfather was an American citizen. So I came here, I went to school, and I have a PhD from Brandeis in Near Eastern and Judaic Studies. I taught a little bit at Suffolk Universities, and I was called to Washington, D.C. to be project manager of the Iraq Research and Documentation Project. It's a project funded by the State Department to create a socio-political profile, on Iraq before the US invasion. And after that, I had to decide whether to join the government or go to the academic field. And I chose to join the academic field. I am an expert. I started my expertise, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and then I expanded it to Iraq, the rest of the Levant, Iran. And today, US foreign policy, Islamism in Europe, and of course, Russia and Iran. For the last 10 years, I would say 8 to 10 years, I've been focusing on China and Russia and their policy vis-a-vis United States and especially the Middle East. And as you see, I have a string of books. I have also another one coming. I have another one is not there. I have a new forthcoming book on Turkey and the Middle East, especially on Lebanon. And a good number of articles. I have over 100 articles. And I love to teach. I am sorry. I should have said that. And I'm a professor of political science at Florida Atlantic University in Sunshine State.
I'm very excited to discover your work. I came across your work from your tweets and from your recent article in National Interest concerning Saudi Arabia and its reforms and impact on the Crown Prince, and addressing some of the criticisms of it. To be sure,
Yes.
a lot of these attacks have been a fragment, not so much of legitimate concerns as much as information warfare. There is, of course, a room for legitimate discussion about Saudi Arabia's economy, political structure, and direction. But much of the criticism levied against its leadership has been of the smear campaign variety that has little to do with legitimate academic examinations. Um, and I think it's a fair point to point that out. Now, I wanted to start out with a broad
Yes.
question, because one of the things that we have seen is that this sort of smear campaigning had been a big issue in the Arab media in past decades. But recently, we have seen some of the, at least English language editions, try to shift away, become more objective, or at least seemingly more fact focused. At the same time, we are seeing that U.S. media and U.S. academia seem to move in the opposite direction, and there isn't always a clear line between academic examination of political subjects and highly personalized, subjective, emotional influence and impact. What do you make of these cross-cultural shifts and paradigms, and how they color the understanding of policymakers of both regions and their interactions?
Okay, I can tell you this, since I am an academic, and before I was an academic, I was, close to the government, although I wasn't an employee of the government, and I have been an analyst for quite some time. You have to understand, in academia, you have different voices. This is a place of intellectual exchange. But something happened in academia for the last, couple of decades or more. You have more of a, I would say, between quote, more of a liberal views, regarding the world, regarding the role of United States, the world, regarding the leaders outside United States. And here, they look at the Arab world and they see you have a lot of dictators, you don't have a democracy, and they are somehow very tough on that. Now, this is my issue with that view, is that, you cannot take a look at Saudi Arabia and think that Saudi Arabia is going to be like United States in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. No, it's going to take, some time. Also, there is another thing also, the culture of Saudi Arabia, the culture of the Gulf, the culture of the Levant, different than the culture of Western Europe and the West, mainly United States. So from that perspective, I feel, yes, and I feel that there is I think there is an undue criticism of what's happening, in the Arab world and in Saudi Arabia. And more, let me raise this point also. And this is something usually I am not that much on Twitter and social media, but recently I said, no, I have to go and say something, because somehow with social media, it's good, but also it has a bad part of it. You have a lot of disinformation, and I don't want to listen to all this knee-jerk assessment. I really want to listen to you, to other people. And this is where I have a problem with. But the point that is that, and I was very upset recently by the Economist. Economist is a very respected, outlet. And they put something, in Arab, most likely in MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and on his igal, on his headdress, a bomb. What kind of a, view picture, why you are doing this to the Arabs? And this happening now, especially I would say that the Arabs are open to Israel. They are spoken with Israel. I would like to see more of a rapport, more of a rapprochement between, even Saudi Arabia and Israel. And this criticism, yes, there are some questions that revolve around Mohammed bin Salman and the death of Khashoggi. But somehow we have to say something. We have to weigh what he has done against what he has reportedly done. You know what I mean? And he has done a lot. I have here in this university, I have 3 from Saudi Arabia. I have 2, I am their chair, and they're doing their PhD studies. And I listen to them, and I listen to social media in Saudi Arabia. The use of Saudi Arabia, regardless of what we feel, regardless of the media, they like Mohammed bin Salman because they believe he is the one who is strong enough, courageous enough to meet the challenges of transforming, of transitioning Saudi Arabia into a better world, into a modern world, into more an open world. And the criticisms that he's receiving, this heavy criticism, I think it's undue. I think it's somehow unfair. So yes, broadly speaking, I agree with you. And here, this is in the media and academia, of course, it reflects itself in the media. It reflects itself in other, realms of our society. And the problem is, you have more of those who criticize than those who say, listen, I have to assess what's happening in the Middle East, not regarding our benchmark, not vis-a-vis how we in the West assess things. No, they have their own culture. I want to assess what's happening based on what's happening in their own country. And this is why, it becomes confusing, it becomes upsetting, distressing, especially now we see that you have an openness in the Middle East and the Gulf. And I'm happy with the openness. Really, I'm happy that now, UAE has a great, trade with Israel. The Israeli are there, Bahrain. You have now more people to people, the peace process between Jordan and Israel. It was more government to government. So now what we see a new era, people to people speaking with each other. And this is what we need. And then once you put all this criticism, all this pressure on a prince like he's a powerful man, and I mentioned that, and I have something to say. Rarely in the Arab world now you see someone who is supported by Egypt, the most populous state that set the tone of Arab politics, for decades, from Jordan, these are the Hashemite and they have a lot of respect, and from Iraq. So really, as a matter of fact, he himself today, he has combined, in his personality, a lot of support coming from different parts of the Arab world. So he's emerging now, and this is the West have to understand that. We have to understand that Mohammed bin Salman today is emerging not only, a ruler or a strong, man in Saudi Arabia, but also as a very influential figure in the Arab world. There is no Nasser, there is no Saddam, there is no Assad. All these leaders, good or bad, they are gone. There is no one. And the Middle East today is going through transition. So transition really, and especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we're going to speak about it now. So it's a transitioning now. It's in the middle, and this is where we have to be very careful how to deal with the Middle East, whether from an academic perspective or from a political perspective.
To be a little provocative, I'm going to ask you, do you think Western countries really want, first of all, any democracy or real reforms in the Middle East? And do you think they want strong leadership, like real strong leadership in the Middle East? Because my sense, I found this economist cover highly ironic, because they did not have that cover during the height of Palestinian suicide bombings, for instance, or during the height of Hezbollah attacks, or during the height of ISIS attacks in Europe, or the genocide of the Yazidis. They had this against the very character, the very personality, who is actually put himself out as combating extremism, as being extremely anti-Muslim brotherhood, which has given root to a lot of these movements, extremist movements. So there is a strange juxtaposition of putting the onus of terrorism on somebody who is literally fighting against terrorism. So the question to me, what does it say? Is it really the specifically anti-Arab bigotry, or is it more about not wanting this paradigm to shift, not wanting a strong leadership in the Middle East to emerge, out of concern for losing power, losing influence, losing access, losing money, whatever else may be?
It's both.
Certain
it's both, Irina, it's both. First, they hear them. Somehow you have a common denominator among many outlets, and I'm not gonna name here. They greatly dislike the guy, and they have been waging a campaign against him. And that campaign has been, for 2 years. But as you mentioned, and what you mentioned is really right on point, is that why today? Why today, when he's combating terrorism, when he's allowing you in the sky for Israeli plane, when he is blessing the go ahead, with more peace, why you are focusing on him especially, and you didn't focus as much on ISIS? You are absolutely right. And I think myself, it's a strong dislike. They don't want him to be there. They would like to delegitimize him. And of course, you have still, in the media where they believe that the Arab world should be more open and democratic, and they don't like the dictator. But the problem is that you have to allow leader to transition the Middle East and the Arab countries through, a plurality, because I know the Middle East. I live the Middle East. I travel the Middle East. Some countries in the Middle East, probably they don't feel, comfortable with the democracy as with enlightened ruler. Some people would like plurality. Mainly plurality, doesn't mean democracy as we see it here today in United States. So this is some of the problem we have. And you are absolutely right on this point, is that we have double standard, and this double standard is being exercised via the leader of Saudi Arabia and some Arab countries in the Middle East.
Let me put it this way. Whenever there were efforts to shift to democracy as such, it has not led to liberalization. We have seen Hamas being voted into power in Gaza and now challenging the Palestinian Authority. We have seen Morsi's rule, short-lived, thankfully, in Egypt, that was not democratic. We are seeing the current Hezbollah alliance with various other parties in Lebanon not producing either democracy in its true sense or liberalization. And we certainly haven't seen Tunisia become a vibrant democracy as a result of the Arab Spring. And after 10 years, it should become obvious to whoever did not get that point previously that these structures, without a transition to liberalism, are not going to produce liberal civil societies. They're going to produce grassroots movements that are not democratic. They're going to produce movements, factions coming to power. So why do you think this talk about democracy continues when it's obvious that regardless of what you think about it as a structure here, and regardless of what some people think is better, a monarchy or a democracy, that actual democracy is simply not going to happen as a result of the types of movements that these critics support?
This is how I feel that, mainly the Western media, how they criticize, they are missing the point. And you raise some good points. For example, I look at Egypt, what do you have? It was the US, not the Muslim Brotherhood, that removed Mubarak. But here we ask this question, what kind of legacies they have in political participation? What kind of a legacies they have in grassroots movements? In most of these countries, really, civil society does not exist. So really what we need to do today, and what really, the Western world and those leaders, including Mohammed bin Salman, that he's trying to do, to build up, to strengthen civil society, and it's gonna take time. When we speak about democracy, you need especially the media to be free. You need to have trade union. You have to have a lot of union. So really, it's something that's extremely important. And something I go back and I really fought some policies that took place here is that, somehow in the West, and again, the media support that they said, listen, democracy is synonymous with election. And this is not so. And I still remember very well. When you had the elections in Gaza. As a matter of fact, you have two leaders. You have Arafat and Netanyahu, begging United States, don't do elections now. Why you want to do elections now? And here we have Hamas. Again, you have it in Egypt. As a matter of fact, we pushed for the election. Why we pushed for the election? Then they needed time. And this is what brought the Muslim Brotherhood in. The Muslim Brotherhood is really organized. It has a hierarchy. Now, through that organization and its hierarchy, it's not open, it's not transparent, but they have it. And something about it, they have been working. They have their own grassroots movements. It's not big, no, but it's functional, it's operational. And if they go to the vote, every Muslim Brotherhood member, he will go himself, he will take his wife, his children, and his neighbors. You don't have it among the others. So myself, when I look at it, I say, listen, you need to build that civil society. You want to support a transition which is easy, which support different civil society organs, and don't go and criticize those people who are trying to do that. And this is where I have issues, with the way we look at the Middle East and our policy in the Middle East, and it really, it's, and again, I have to say something again, I don't want to absolve the Middle Eastern and including the rulers of the Middle East of any wrong. No, they have done, they have built autocracy, in the Middle East. They have built it, really. So it's gonna take time, and we have to work, really. For example, we are friends with Egypt, we are friends with Kuwait, we are friends with everybody. We can, for example, not to go after them, but why don't we say, listen, we support you, but why don't you open public space a little by little? And if you are doing that, like Mohammed bin Salman, let's not go criticize you. And one day you are pariah, one day you are rogue, one day I want to remove you, one day I want to this, one day I want to that. But this will give, somehow a psychological reaction from this leader. So I tell you, listen, what's United States is doing? And some things that is to be said, Irina, here, and I'm sorry to say that. And I mentioned it, I believe, in a tweet or something. And based on what I read and based on what I talk, I'm always in contact with people in the Middle East. I'm always, read their opinions. When some officials, so I am not lumping people, when some officials, American officials, speak about democracy, they worry in the Middle East. They worry about the Middle East. They first things about Iraq, second Afghanistan. You know what I mean? They worry really, what kind of democracy you're gonna bring in? So really, we have to be very careful how to deal with the Middle East. And my advice and my recommendation, I would say, listen, there is no one perfect, really no one perfect. And if this ruler is trying to open up Saudi Arabia or in other places in the Middle East, let's not go and criticize them and put them in the mud.
This personalized attacks, to me, you made a very important statement. This attack is not just on one person. It's not even just attack on Saudi Arabia. It seems to be an attack on all the countries that follow that leadership and follow his example. And we are seeing, and this is kind of a good segue into my next question, which is we are seeing a struggle in the Middle East today between countries that are looking to open up to the West, to reform and to produce a better quality of life for their people. I'm not going to call it democratization or liberalization, but to produce a better quality of life for their people. And on the other hand, we are seeing Iranian and Islamist influence movement and countries that are either not going anywhere or shifting in the opposite direction. And these personalized attacks seem to fuel additional conflicts, and they give ammunition to the countries going backwards or not moving to open up. Now that seems to be against US interests, against European interests. It makes the world less secure. These countries produce poverty, they produce indoctrination, and they produce factional struggles that sometimes spill over into the outside world. So why would the West push for the attack on these countries led by this one personality that has it in him to do that, when it's obvious that the outcome will empower pro-Iran, pro-Islamist, pro-terrorist groups, dictators, movements, and so forth, and which will ultimately mean difficulties for trade, difficulties for communication, difficulties for security, difficulties for pursuing business and interests and everything else. What seems to be the goal here? Today, U.S. resumed rather fruitless discussions in Vienna with Iran in light of all of this, and I'm just trying to figure out why would U.S. spend all this time catering to interests that undermine their own regional concerns.
Okay. Irina, this is a big question, and let me, parcel it out, because it deals with many things. First, you have to look at American foreign policy in the region. And American foreign policy in the region, really, what happened is that you saw, especially in Iraq, we went there, we invaded Iraq, we shattered the regional order, but United States has not been able to build a new regional order. And this has led to jockeying for power by different countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, and others. And again, you have the rise of Salafi jihadism, again, that played a role. Now, at this time also, you had the rise of China. If you look at it, you have coinciding with the rise of China. And if you look at the doctrine, the military strategy of United States, you go back to Obama, and then Trump, so we have a shift already. It was out there. Mainly if you look at the 2022, if you look at 2020, 2019, 2016, you had a shift. So mainly the Middle East now, American foreign policy said, listen, we need to stabilize the Middle East so as to reorient our foreign policy toward China. Now, from this perspective, when Obama was the president, he said, listen, in order for me to do that, I have to speak with the Iranians. And this is why, as a matter of fact, don't forget, they held secret talks in Yemen. Let's not forget that. They had secret talks, and then Israel and Saudi Arabia knew, and they were very upset. So from the position of United States, why they are talking with the Iranian, why they are doing this, they feel that speaking with the Iranians will lead to a stabilization of the Middle East in general, and not to lead to a war, and United States will go and focus on China. Well, this today, this has really failed. And today, thanks to the recent visit of Pelosi to China, we are going to see, more Chinese involvement, more Russian involvement in the Middle East. This is one factor. The second factor is that this is when you look at the Middle East. At the Middle East, you see now they speak. During the Cold War, you had what they used to call not only the Cold War, but they used to speak about the Arab Cold War. You have the conservative and you have the nationalist. The conservative led by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, and the nationalists, they were led by Egypt, Nasser. And of course, when I speak about the nationalists, they were more in the camp of the Eastern camp in the Soviet Union. Now this has disappeared after the fall of the Soviet Union. And what do you have now today in the Middle East? You have what is so-called the axis of resistance, and the conservative / nationalist. Mainly today you have Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf. They are not part of the regional of the axis of the axis of resistance. So this has created now today two axes. Now this is what again baffles me with some media. Is that I don't think they have a good grasp, a really good grasp of what's happening in the region. So I don't have a good grasp of what's happening, how Iran looks at the region, what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Iraq. You know what I mean? And this led to really and add to this the dislike of certain leader, and really I would say it I don't think they think highly of some Middle Eastern ruler. This led to some kind of a confounding view of the Middle East. And this is what's happening. You have some, indeed, they speak nicely about the Middle East, but you have a lot that speak badly about the Middle East. Some that will say, listen, we have to bring Iran in. Iran is key to stability. And some would say, no, what we are going to do. And here there is something to say also. When you have, again, in American national security, for example, let's take Saudi, since I'm speaking about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and United States, they are very close, and I would consider as allies. But when United States look at the region, it's the way it looks at its national interest do not neatly overlap with Saudi national interest. You know what I mean? And this is why For example, when Iran carried out the attack, drone and missiles against, Saudi Arabia, the facility to produce oil, and halved, the production, the export of oil by half. Let's not forget that. United States, even with Trump, he was very careful not to do anything. You know what I mean? So my point, you have some kind in the foreign policy establishment in United States. If you that, something, we don't want to be involved in the Middle East. We don't want to be sucked in the Middle East. You know what I mean? And at the same time, we don't, we don't regard some of the leader of the Middle East. So the best thing to do, how to maintain stability. But the problem is with maintaining stability is that, look what's happening now in the Middle East. You have a high level of uncertainty. You have potential conflicts today in Iraq, in Lebanon, and in Syria, and in Lebanon, and between Lebanon and Israel. So really, they look for stability, and the way they pursue stability is kind of leading from behind, and this is what we are having today, and very unfortunately.
You're seeing that while US is struggling with these issues, it doesn't seem to outline its own interests very clearly. Russia, Iran, China have no problem with making friends with absolutely everybody from Assad to the Saudis, to UAE, or at least pretending to, for the sake of pushing their own agenda.
Correct.
We are seeing that for Russia, this is a strategic moment because they have been able to woo away the Arab world from support for US sanctions against itself after its invasion of Ukraine. And we're also seeing very strange alliances because on the one hand, you have China being very close to Iran, close oil trade partners, providing it with surveillance technology, training with Russia and Iran in various maritime exercises. On the other hand, it's building missile and drone factories in UAE and Saudi Arabia and cooperating on plane equipment and so forth. And it's obviously not playing all sides to its own advantage, and it's not necessarily a good friend to anybody. But we are seeing that as a result of US policy, we have these shifts that leaves certain countries in the middle. Lebanon is basically a failed state, but it's, you've got Hezbollah on the one hand, you've got a corrupt clique of other interests on the other. You have Syria with Assad, and now Assad is being normalized by Arab states, but at the same time, none of the issues with Iran or Russia have been conclusively dealt with. What do you see? What direction do you see these countries going? Is there any way to overcome this increasing influence by these powers in those middle states that come? And is there anything that can be done at this point to reverse the course?
All right, let me put it in perspective from the Arab standpoint, and I would look at it from an American standpoint. As a matter of fact, I covered the American standpoint, stability. But from the Arab standpoint, there is and this is what I mentioned, level of uncertainty in the region, and it goes back to the invasion of Iraq. Let's not forget that. As a matter of fact, Saudi Arabia and most of the Arab world, they were against it. Why you want to invade? You are going to open the door for Iran. And that's exactly what happened. Iran projected its power. Then you have the secret talks with Iran, that they didn't like it. What are you doing? Then you have, the other issue, the Arab rebellion, and they felt that United States did not support Mubarak and others, and they were really uncertain about United States. And then you came the attack on Saudi Arabia, and still you have attack on Saudi Arabia. So yes, Saudi Arabia buys weapons, buys Patriot missile, but the question is what you are going to do. Where are you here? Where are you on the ground? And then you have Syria. You have Syria again. That was a big issue from the Arab perspective. They believe that United States, how United States is gonna change or transform the policy in Syria while it has only few soldiers on the ground. Today we have from 500 to 700 soldiers only, and before we had 2,000. 2,000. What's 2,000? You know, yes, we have air power, we have other power, but you need boots on the ground to compete with the others. So from their perspective, they felt that United States, it's mainly interested in making sure that Russia does not win in Syria, rather than trying to find a solution for Syria. And then you got Iraq, and let's not forget, Iraq is a big lesson, for all, not only for Arabs, for everything. We did mistakes, I studied Iraq. I knew about Iraq, and my heart bleeds now when I hear about Iraq. We did a lot of mistakes, and now what do you have? You have United States has completed its mission. We are no longer, the combat mission of United States ended. We are now only to support them, counsel them, and what do you have now in Iraq, really in Iraq today, and then in the region? You have today, after the assassination of Soleimani and Al-Muhandis, you have now a agenda, and the agenda by the pro-Iranian militia in Iraq to drive United States out from Iraq. And this is, they are getting emboldened now by Russia, by what you say, the Russian rapprochement with the Arab world, and of course the Chinese trade and everything with the Arab world. So mainly from an Arab vantage point, when they look at United States, let me say that very carefully here. The Arabs still like United States, prefer United States than any other countries. Still, United States provide an umbrella of security, but also at the same time, they don't know, or they feel that United States does not have a compass for its policy in the region. And this is why I can say that, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when United States tried to call the leaders, UAE and Saudi Arabia, nobody picked up the phone. And they did not jump on the bandwagon of sanctions against Russia. And this is what you said, they are in the middle. And this is what I mentioned that today. Today, United States has to recognize that in the world, the world is unfolding into three camps, the way I see it myself. And the way some Arab countries see it. The Western camp, the other camp led by Russia and China. And now, the biggest gift, and let me here chime in or interject. The biggest gift Pelosi did to Taiwan is that it brought a better relationship between Russia and China. Whereas China before wasn't, 100% with Russia, I can tell you this. Today, China is 100% with Russia. So to go back, so you have three camps. Western camp, a camp led by China and by Russia, and a middle non-committed camp. What's non-committed camp? This is where you have the Arab world. This is where you have South Africa. This is where you have Indonesia, Egypt, Mexico, India. They say, listen, why I want to follow you? What are you doing? You know what I mean? So it's mainly, it's about United States, how it's leading its foreign policy and not expecting what's going to happen. For example, I can tell you this is what's happening, and that was big as I spoke with some Arabs, and some colleagues of mine. When Biden say, listen, I think the war is not going to end. I don't know this, I don't know that. They ask this question, okay, you are fighting a war. You don't know your objective. What's your objective in that war? So the point is, you have certain policies at work, but you have certain policies at United States that had pursued, that confounded not only the Arab world, but other countries as well. And this is some of the problem we are seeing, and they are manifesting themselves in the Middle East.
Well, I would say that one of the biggest problems with the visit is not that it shouldn't have happened. Nobody should be threatening US or telling its members of the government where to travel. We certainly don't tell China where to go or not to go. But the biggest problem is that lack of US commitment and follow through. US, particularly this administration, is doing symbolic gestures or half measures with no strong commitment. I'm not entirely sure that US is willing to back Taiwan in the event of an invasion, and I'm not sure it's willing to do whatever it takes to break up China-Russia alliance. which was growing even without this current situation, probably would have eventually gotten back gotten stronger anyway. In some shape or form, China does see U.S. as a strategic problem, and Russia for it is less of a problem. It's a less powerful state and does not present much of a threat to Chinese interests. So I think it would have been a matter of time before China and Russia completed their rapprochement to Taiwan or no Taiwan. The problem is U.S. lack of commitment sends a signal that it is willing to do symbolic gestures that annoy countries, but it is not necessarily willing to stand by where it matters. And we are seeing that the same with Saudi Arabia. And this brings me to the issue of Biden's trip to the region, which appears to have solved no problems. The trip is over. Biden had conversations that do not sound particularly productive, came back. Where are we now? What has happened as a result? Has any of the policies changed regionally? Are we seeing any moves to open up the sale of offensive, not defensive weapons to Saudi Arabia, and that has been banned previously? And what's happening with regards to Lebanon and Syria? So far, is there a shift of in strategy as we're seeing strikes from Turkey, increased Iranian presence, and so forth?
Okay. Let me take one at a time. Regarding Saudi Arabia and Biden's visit, you know what he spoke about him, and I don't want to repeat that. And then he went and he, kind of fisted him, and then they sat down. So I myself look at it. It was not a win for the United States. It was a win for Mohammed bin Salman. He didn't pick up the phone. The president went there because he had to go there. He is facing, face the problems. He worries about November elections are coming. These are big, and domestic politics have a lot of influence over foreign policy in the United States. So he went there. So Mohammed bin Salman emerged as the one really, he was the winner. Now, let's put it out. What happened after that? Regarding the oil, Saudi Arabia said, okay, I'm going to raise, but it did not raise much. Second, in September, have you looked how much they're going to raise? OPEC, they're going to raise only 100,000 barrels. This is not much at all. So when we speak about they're going to, inundate the market or give more, no, they did not give more. Why? Because they are taking care of themselves. I think that the Saudi, they feel, listen, Saudi interest first. And this is what I mentioned in the article, yes, we like United States, we are allied with United States, but we are no longer in a relationship that is patron-client relationship. We are on a par. But on the other hand, also, Saudi Arabia went and bought weapons. If you hear about it, Saudi Arabia and UAE. Saudi Arabia bought close to 3 billion, approved, I think, and UAE close to 2 billion. And mainly they were Patriot missiles and other sophisticated weapons. So from my perspective now, what it has accomplished, they are going to try to create deterrence vis-a-vis Iran. And now some in the Middle East, they say, well, listen, we would like to have some kind of a NATO in the Middle East. I say no. The Saudi and UAE especially, they don't want to have a NATO in the Middle East. They want to have a deterrence, and in that deterrence, they want to have some kind of a regional deterrence, sharing information, sharing intelligence information, including with Israel, to deter Iran, but from the Gulf itself, not a alliance mainly focused on Iran. And this is where we have to make really a distinction, how United States and how Israel and how the Middle East, especially the Gulf, perceive what's going to happen. So I see myself, you are going to have a regional alliance that work to deter Iran, but not an alliance to, for example, if you have a war with Iran, to work together to fight Iran. This is the way I see it. This is the way I see it myself. So this is, please. You want to say something?
Yeah, this is an important distinction, and I kind of wanted to follow up with a contradiction that I see here, actually. On the one hand, you have new blocs and alliances like I2U2 with India and UAE emerging, and various other groups of countries trying to push for various the Abraham Accords countries, the Negev Summit gathering, all of that, the informal alliance with Saudi Arabia, defense issues. But on the other hand, US seems to be pushing some of these countries into Iran camp. UAE refused to join the Air Defense Pact. UAE actually resumed trade, grew trade with Iran on many issues. Saudi Arabia is negotiating with Iran, albeit in Iraqi framework, and that seems to be a point of conjecture from Biden. So how are these countries going to deter Iran if some of them are being pushed to normalize and frankly abandoning the very defense and deterrence alliances that Biden is working on? Aren't they being forced to join the anti-Israel bloc here? I mean,
No,
I'm trying to figure out
no,
what's
no, it's
happening
not.
here.
Well, we have seen it in the world. As a matter of fact, look at the boss. You know, when you have the Soviet Union and United States, they built deterrence against each other, mutual destructions that prevented them from going into a war. So it's what they built, deterrence, until, you know, at one time, you know, Soviet Union couldn't catch up with United States. You have not identical scenario, you have a similar scenario. Listen, it's very important to look how the Arab there in UAE, especially since you mentioned UAE. UAE, they believe, listen, UAE, how many people, how many, they are not even 1 million citizens, you know what I mean? And it's a very rich country and they want to take it to be, you know, postmodern, you know, a lot of things happening. They are focusing on trade, on opening up and making it a hub, a global hub. So they know that any war is going to happen in the region, they're going to be frontline state. They don't want to be frontline state. You know what I mean? They don't want to be frontline state. Saudi Arabia, when I spoke about the level of uncertainty you have in the region, they say, listen, if something happened and they hit our oil, and our gas, what we are going to do, really? So yes, we would like to deter Iran, and create some kind of a deterrence between us and Iran. And at the same time, not to let Iran do anything that is out of the ordinary vis-a-vis us. This is how they believe, because they believe that they are frontline state. And since you mentioned Israel, as a matter of fact, and them, it behooves them to have a better relationship. I am for a better relationship. But do you think that, if Israel tomorrow has a war with Iran, Saudi Arabia is going to jump the bandwagon and say, listen, I'm going to fight with you? It's not going to fight with Israel. No. And this is the way I see it, because they might give Israel intelligence coordinate, intelligence sharing of information, yes, but not to side openly say, listen, we are with you, we are going to fight shoulder to shoulder with you. It's not going to happen. But what's happening, let's not underestimate what's happening. You have now a better trade, better cooperation in all aspects. And this is what we need, people to people peace. It's extremely important. So I'm not going to underestimate what's happening, but also at the same time, I'm not going to overestimate what's happening so as to create a NATO alliance in the Middle East. It's not going to happen.
Let me ask you this, practical terms. Iran has militias all over the region. It has
Correct.
Hezbollah, which is basically a quasi-army, quasi-military in Lebanon. It's got Iraqi militias. It's got, some level of coordination with Assad's forces. It's got the Houthis in Yemen becoming increasingly more sophisticated. It's got all these people willing, and it's got also Afghan and Pakistani brigades and recruits and anybody that is willing to pay money for to come and fight in the event it decides to pursue a campaign. And this proxy is becoming integrated. Now, what are we seeing with the Arab world and Israel? Okay, they're willing to share intelligence. They're willing to maybe conduct some joint small operations somewhere, maybe over Syria or places like that. They're not willing to fight together in a war. So I see a lack of balance here. They're still, Israel, yes, they kind of expect Israel to take the lead because Israel has a very advanced military. It's believed to have nuclear powers. It's the only country in the region to have that at this moment. So they do believe that Israel is a powerful force, which it is, but it's also a small country with limited forces and limited capabilities against Iran or any other adversary. Hezbollah has hundreds of thousands of missiles. There is also an encirclement strategy against Israel by various militias. Hamas, which was a Muslim Brotherhood entity, it was not an Iranian entity, but now it's becoming a pro-Iran force. You have Hezbollah, you have Iraqis now, and not even the Houthis. So how is that going to work? Doesn't Iran have a clear strategic advantage here, even leaving the nuclear weapons aside? And it seems to me that Iran is very close to gaining nuclear weapons as well.
Okay, well, this is how I look at it myself, and being, and being someone who studied in Israel, who was a fellow at the Truman Institute, Dayan Center, and who lived in Lebanon, traveled to Syria, and traveled in the Middle East, and I still speak with them all. Let me tell you this. Iran has gained a leverage in asymmetrical warfare vis-a-vis the Arab world. Asymmetrical warfare. I wouldn't say the whole warfare, no, an asymmetrical warfare, because it went there and it supported certain groups that they were not doing well, and it did it very well. They are patient, the Iranians. And when you think about Iranian foreign policy, I don't underestimate the Iranians. And when I think about their psyche, how they think, see how much it takes patience to have a Persian rug. You see how they weave it, knit it together, easy, and it takes year, 2, 3. This is how they do their foreign policy. The Arab world did not do that. You know what I mean? So there is a distinction between how Iran approached the Middle East and how Saudi Arabia approached the Middle East. I'll give you an example in Lebanon, which I know like the palm of my hand. Iran went and supported, as a matter of fact, Hezbollah and others, whoever wanted to resist Israel, whoever wanted to resist the other part, the other faction in Lebanon, Iran supported them. And it sent troops there. Let's not forget. When Israel, I was serving in the Red Cross in Lebanon at the time. When Israel invaded Lebanon, what did Khomeini do early on? He sent really a force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to Baalbek, not only to help him, but also to indoctrinate them. You know what I mean? The Arab world, Saudi Arabia, I was very aware of what's going on. Did not send people, said, listen, let's sit down and talk. You have Philippe Habib, I don't know if you remember, the Reagan, emissary to the Lebanon. So this is how it started in Lebanon, where the Iranian moved in while Saudi Arabia was talking and supporting by money. And the Iranian went in. It really, let me tell you something, Irina, which I saw in my eyes. When the Israeli invaded Lebanon, who threw rice on the incoming Israeli first? It wasn't the Christian. It was the Shia of South Lebanon. The Shia of South Lebanon were the first to throw rice on the incoming Israeli soldier. And this is what happened now. Then this has completely changed, where it became taboo for the Shia to speak with Israeli. And then you had, the resistance against the Israelis. And this is thanks to the indoctrination of Iran, the work that Iran did in Lebanon. So this is what I mentioned myself. This is just an example I'm giving you. And it kept it on, it kept it on, it kept it on. And you have mistakes. Don't get me wrong. The Israeli, the Christians, the Americans, many mistakes were done. And somehow, it benefit directly or indirectly, they were exploited by the Syrian and by the Iranian. And this is what happened again with the Houthi. Let me tell you here something which is extremely important, and I hope those who listen to you would listen to this. The Houthi, they are Zaidi Shia. They are Houthi, called Houthi because their imam, their leader, his last name is Houthi. Now, when you come to the ideology, the Zaidi Shia of Yemen, only in Yemen, they are ideologically close to Sunnism more than close to the 12er Shia Islam. But what happened is that when south of Yemen wanted to secede from the Union, the Imam Houthi supported them. Then he was kind of menaced. He left, he escaped. He went to Qom, and from Qom, where did they send them? Let me tell you what they send them to Har Tahrik, mainly to West Beirut to be with Hezbollah. So this is how the Houthi started to be indoctrinated and be supported by Iran early on. So this is how Iran moves in. You know what I mean? You have mistakes that happen. You have certain groups unhappy, and then Iran moves in. And this is why myself, I focus on stability, you know, in the Middle East, the right way of stability. Look at Lebanon today. In Lebanon already you have weak national identity. You have a confessional system now, which is terrible. In Lebanon now, you know, it's terrible. You know, the Shia, they, you know, who are supporting Hezbollah, they are in a different universe than the Sunni or the Druze or the Christian who don't support Hezbollah. Totally different universe. Look what's happening in Lebanon. Today we speak, but today marks the second anniversary of the nuclear-like port explosion in Beirut. To over 200 people killed, over 7,000 injured, over 300,000, you know, homeless. And what's happening now? No one was taken to justice. No justice delivered. Hezbollah has been really disrupting and banning anything from happening. So this is what's happening. But ask yourself, how did Hezbollah become so powerful? Hezbollah did not get powerful yesterday or 5 years or 10 years ago. From 1982 to now, Hezbollah has been building little by little. While the others in Lebanon, you know, and here, you know, you had highway robbers in Lebanon. Let's call a spade a spade. Highway, you know what's highway robbers? Highway robbers. And when I look at Lebanon, I see, you know, especially after the civil war ended in 1990, you know, they said, okay, we are going to turn a blind eye to Hezbollah. Hezbollah can do whatever it likes. And Hezbollah, you know, who are less corrupt than the highway robber, I would say, listen, okay, go ahead and steal the state. And they robbed the state. And not only they robbed the state, they robbed the people of Lebanon. You know what I mean? So this is what you have in Lebanon. And it started with Iranian moving in, supporting little by little by little by little. Again with Syria. Syria, the same thing, as a matter of fact. Syria, you know, they wanted the Iranian to make sure that the Syrian regime will not fall. Why? Because if you go back to the Iran-Iraq war, all the world, the Arab world, was against Iran. One country sided with Syria. Sorry, one country sided with Iran. It was Syria. And for them, it is crucial. It's imperative to keep Hezbollah, you know, mainly it's a what we call it strategic back, you know, the back, you know, for Hezbollah, strategic, you know, for Hezbollah, and, you know, and for Iran. Syria is too important. And this is why early on they went, you know, full, you know, speed into Syria. How did we manage to go into Syria? We didn't know who to support. First, we didn't know what to support, who we support, you know, and then we came to support some Salafi jihadi. So Salafi jihadi, you know, they kind of moved to ISIS. Then you have the emergence of ISIS. It was too confusing for us in Syria. But the point is, you know, we didn't say, listen, if we're gonna have, this is the way I see it. If you wanna pursue a foreign policy in the Middle East, don't pursue it half measure. Either you go full way or don't do it. And I think really, you know, Syria was a failure, and Iraq, broadly speaking, also you had some, I would say, some improvement, but it did not go the way for United States. And the way I see it myself, this is a failed in perspective. Iran goes in, you know, and it builds its power little by little, patience, little by little, little by little.
But that leaves us still at this conundrum that any defense deterrence alliance is not ultimately going to be effective, because there is an inherent disadvantage. Israel is powerful but small. The Arab states are not powerful enough, and they also have significant internal disputes, and they are not willing to fight with Israel when worst comes to worst. Iran, on the other hand, has managed to create enough proxies to turn them basically into a mini empire. So how do we juxtapose these two issues? What's the solution?
Okay, well, solutions, there is no easy solution now. let me tell you now, it's the Middle East now is very uncertain, and we have to support our allies and to make sure to tell them, listen, we confirm and affirm our solidarity with you. This is number one priority. Really, although I would say that the way we are dealing with Russia and China, really, it has upended the way the Arab world look at United States. Really, now you have three areas in the Middle East that United States has to be very careful. You have Iraq, you have Turkey, Syria, and you have Lebanon, Israel. This is where United States has to be very active, in preventing conflict, and supporting some kind of a solution, not to be pro, Iran, but really, in the middle. Now, you mentioned some things that Iran, it's doing this and this. Don't forget, Iranian regime is not a suicidal regime, and Iranian, true, they do that, but still they worry about their rule in Iran. Let's not forget that. And they worry against that United States someday or Israel someday is gonna wage a huge, campaign against them. So don't think the Iranian don't worry about Israel or don't worry about United States. But this is what the Iranian do. Whatever they do in a way to fall short of triggering a US reaction, strong reaction against them. So they are smart, and this is how they use the proxy. So I will tell, listen, for example, with Yemen, with the Houthi, say, listen, when they hit Saudi Arabia, listen, we have nothing to do with it. With Hezbollah, they tell you, listen, they are defending their lands. You have still Israel occupies 7 villages, Ghajar, and others. You have maritime dispute, you have border dispute. We are supporting Hezbollah and the government, so don't blame us. When you go to Syria, they will tell you, listen now today, listen, UAE wants to have Syrian regime. Saudi Arabia speaking, Egypt speaking, why you are not speaking? So the point is, Iran is very careful not to trigger the wrath of United States, and they know that. They saw what happened to Iraq, and they saw that United States might not invade, but it might go and remove the regime through bombing them. Now, this United States, of course, doesn't want to do unless it is forced of doing it. And this is where the Iranians comes in the Middle East. They don't force the United States to carry out such a response. They are smart the way they deal business in the Middle East, as I mentioned to you, and they pursue asymmetrical warfare with Israel and especially with United States. And now recently, with Russia, you have a push, for example, now to drive United States out from Iraq and Syria.
Well, I've seen that a lot of missed opportunities on the US part, specifically the opportunities to gain hearts and minds to compete for the very people that Iran is recruiting to strengthen its network. And frankly, the Arab states or even Israel have not been quite as successful in that regard as they could be. Israel is successful in intelligence operations in Iran, certainly, but
right.
It's not successful along with everyone else in reversing the proxy networks.
Correct.
So the question is, what can be done to win back some of the people and basically have them turn away from supporting Hezbollah, from supporting militias? How do we regain the trust or at least some level of collaboration with these groups?
It's very difficult now. It's very difficult. The only thing is that this could happen if you have stability in Lebanon, mainly when Hezbollah no longer say, I am resistance.
But
you know what I mean?
That's very unlikely to happen.
Well, this is what, so mainly it's the very unlikely to happen, but there is something here. The way I see it myself, I don't see anytime soon that Lebanon, for example, will have a peace treaty with Israel. But listen, you have a good number of Lebanese, with the exception of Hezbollah, they would like to have a stable border. And you have an armistice, 1949 armistice with Israel. So here today, if United States is able to resolve the maritime and land border dispute with Israel, This could lead really to kind of stability where, and not in the short term, but where in the medium and long term, Hezbollah's power will decline. I have to tell you something, Irina, that I believe in, and I came to believe in really because I lived it. I always thought Hezbollah, after 2006, by the way, 2006, I was in Lebanon, that, United States or Israel can defeat it. No, if Hezbollah is going to be defeated, or if Hezbollah's, to reduce the power of Hezbollah to a level where doesn't affect you. This has to be done domestically, Irina, really. I don't think that United States can do it. I think myself, if United States is going to be more involved, it's going to empower Hezbollah, really. And I'll give you example to that. So mainly domestically, in order for this domestically to happen, you need some kind of stability, and you need to have a plan to strengthen the organs, for example, civil society organ in Lebanon. In Lebanon, you have parties, you have medias, you have civil groups, and you have independents in Lebanon, 13 that broke party lists. But it's gonna take time. It's gonna take time. And I know here probably some in the West or you or others, they feel that, why not now? I think it's gonna take time. You have to consider one thing. It took 40 years for Hezbollah to be at this point. You are not going to take it back, to where it was in 1 year or 2 years.
We have seen a lot of protests against Hezbollah, even from
Yes.
Shias in Lebanon, over the economic mismanagement and the completely destruction of the economy. Nevertheless, it proved insufficient to deal with a significant blow. Now, with the opportunities with the borders, who's to say that Hezbollah will not somehow manage to provoke an encounter or sabotage this negotiation process?
Okay. All right.
Concerned of losing power, really.
Okay. Let me tell you, because Hezbollah, Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, he spoke on the 25th, a few days ago, and he threatened, he not only to hit Karish, the disputed gas field, but also what he said what's behind Karish. And let me give you the context, if you'd like to hear me now, where Hezbollah stand regarding this issue.
Mm-hmm.
In between Lebanon and Israel, you have a disputed area of close to 860 square kilometers. In that disputed area, you have mainly two major fields. You have Kana field and Karish field. Lebanon has had two positions in determining its southernmost, border, mainly with Israel. One position was that did not include Karish, but the other one, based on the army study and a study by an organization in Britain, said, no, we have a share in Karish. Now, what Hezbollah came in, he said, listen, as long as we have disputes and as long as you have the war between Russia and Ukraine, and as long as you have the European really would like for Israel and Egypt to export their gas through Egypt to Europe, we are not going to be, left behind. So what he's done is that you have disputed border, and his threat was, if you are not, it's not only to resolve the dispute, but also to lift direct or indirect pressure and sanctions against Lebanon to allow companies like Total and others to do business in Lebanon. And this is where it is extremely tricky. And let me give you the dynamics in Lebanon today. The president of Lebanon, the speaker, Nabih Berri, who is very close to Hezbollah Shia, and the caretaker prime minister, they came and you had some strides, good environment with Amos Hochstein, the American intermediary. In that, the latest talk was, okay, listen, you will have Kana field and Israel will have Karish field. And this is Israel might agree. But the point is, this is where Hezbollah came in. And Hezbollah in his message said, listen, even if you are going to resolve this maritime dispute, it's not going to be fair for Lebanon. I am being charged to protect Lebanon. and I'm going to tell you is that, you know, alongside resolving this dispute, we have to allow all companies, remove all obstacles to all companies to come to explore and extract oil and gas from Lebanon. And this is where Hezbollah, you know, in and Lebanon in. And it's extremely fluid. Now, I am hoping that you will have some kind of a resolution, because Israel does not have to war. And Hezbollah, despite its talk of war and I'm gonna hit, it still doesn't want war. You have now a kind of a unanimity in Lebanon. A lot of Christian, a lot of Sunni, and a lot of Druze. They don't approve of Hezbollah. They don't approve of Hezbollah. And Hezbollah knows that. And Hezbollah worries the most now, not war with Israel, but war within Lebanon, civil war in Lebanon. So this is where, you know, it's trying to appear, listen, I am the protector of Lebanon. You know, I want to have my own power as the power behind the negotiation of the Lebanese government. But also, this is a sword with double-edged. This is a double-edged sword, is that Hezbollah could take Lebanon into a war, and it could be disastrous to Lebanon. It could be disastrous to Lebanon. So this is where the dynamics you have in the Middle East today with the maritime border. But you have some hope that some deal could happen. For example, you know, United States tried, you know, she said, listen, okay, you don't have gas. Probably I'm going to let Egypt, you know, to give gas through Syria. Now, we know that Egypt does not have the gas, and the gas is going to come from Israel. But the point is, Hezbollah did not raise nothing, did not say anything. So what that tells you, Hezbollah, on the one hand, he is vocal about the resistance axis. And on the other hand, doesn't want to have a very completely failed state that could lead to civil war. And this is where United States has to, you know, to interject and try to kind of find a solution. And I think some kind of solution is possible. But having said that, you know, I am very cautious optimist. I am not a pessimist, although I have seen a lot of bad things in the Middle East, but still, you know, I am a cautious optimist. So this is where you are in the Middle East between Israel and Lebanon. It is, on the one hand, you have some signs of hope, but on the other hand, Irina, let's not fool ourselves. You have the danger of a terrible, awful, devastating war between Lebanon and Israel. And it's not going to be only between Lebanon and Israel. It's going to be between Lebanon and Israel, and you have some pro Hezbollah, pro-Iranian in Syria, and some in Iraq. And sadly, I said that. Really sadly, I said that.
I mean, it seems to me, and I may be wrong, that Iran seems to be waiting for something to give green light to any attacks. We are seeing that there are continuing truce with the Houthis, that they keep allowing them to conclude the truce. We are seeing these negotiations with Israel. We are seeing kind of a quiet with that respect. What do you think is going on? What is Iran waiting for? Because they clearly are still, on the one hand, yes, they want to preserve their regime, but on the other hand, let's be clear, they also want to control the region. They don't, and with Israel there, it's just not going to be possible. So what?
Iran now, the way I listen to them and I analyze, Iran now is in a happy seat. It's in a happy driver's seat, you know. And the Russian-Ukrainian war, it's a gift for the Iranians. Let's not forget, Putin was there, and Putin was gonna buy not only drones but also other material as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you have now, I won't speak about strategic cooperation. This might, you know, transform into strategic alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because let's not forget, you have the Central Asian country. Putin is very interested in them. Iran has a history there, you know, under the Persian Empire. So this is mainly for the Iranian now. Why they want to be bothered with Yemen? Now they are going to build more power for them. And today with what's happening with China. China, you mentioned China and Iran. China, as a matter of fact, has has concluded a deal, for $400 billion with Iran. That's a huge lifeline. That was close to 2 years, a year and a half ago. So Iran now, if you are Iran now, they feel that the way the world, or the way the post-Cold War era, after Russia invaded Ukraine, from its perspective, it's more convenient to them. It's more better for them. You know what I mean? So they don't want to rush into anything. They are building their power. They are building their alliances, and they are in the driver's seat. So here, let me tell you this. And I'm sorry to say that, because I know you come from Ukraine, and I know your heart is bleeding, as all our hearts, what's happening. But I think myself, from United States perspective, I think that prolonging the war in Ukraine is not going to be helpful for Ukrainian, or for United States, or for the global, or for the international community. We have to see a negotiated settlement, Irina.
I don't think a negotiated settlement will be possible for one simple reason, which is what Putin's actual goals in Ukraine are. And they are not to oust the NATO. I think all of that was nonsense. I think clear evidence of Putin's other strategic moves show that his interests in Ukraine are rational. I don't agree with them, but they are articulable, and they contain and they mean controlling territory that contains energy, with the means of controlling energy output to entire Europe, and creating a strong pro-Russian presence in a very strategic area. It's territorially strategic, and it's energetically strategic. For that reason, that dispute is not going to be political either to Europe, or forget the United States for a second, or to Russia. This is a battle over a very strategic resource, and if Russia is to embed itself in that particular area, it will be a permanent control of energy resources to all of Europe. That is why there's not going to be a negotiated settlement. It has nothing to do with democracy, nothing to do with human rights, nothing to do with humanitarian concerns. It's a simple geopolitical calculus.
Okay, Irina, listen, the world has seen so many, as a matter of fact, more difficult situation. And at the end of the day, you have to find a settlement. Listen, finding a settlement or negotiated settlement in the near future, better than in 5 years or 10 years.
Well,
this condition
that would be true if we were dealing with actors who are willing. Let's say the Lebanon. I actually have more faith in the Lebanon-Israel dispute because it's concrete and specific than in this particular issue, because Putin's goals are far beyond just Ukraine to the extent possible. And Putin is not the only actor. People believe that he is the only decision maker in Russia. That's not exactly the case.
Okay.
So there are a lot of interests that are aligned, not only with particular control of energy sources, but also with other matters. And going further, at some point you have to ask yourself: if you give him enough, is he going to stop? The answer is no, because we've already seen the case with Georgia, with Moldova, with Crimea. Now, with increasing interest in controlling those particular territories in Russia, but also with Russia's moves elsewhere, not only Europe. So I don't know.
Irina, listen. What you are saying is valid, but also don't forget the point. He's suffering too, and the Russians are suffering too. You know what I mean?
So Putin doesn't care about Russian suffering. That's the problem with autocrats.
But there is a certain point where he has to decide, okay, I have to do a compromise, because wars, look at it. Look at the Iran-Iraq war, 8 years. What did it accomplish? Nothing after a while. Look at all kinds of war between countries. You have, even if you are sitting, you say, listen, there is today absolutely no, but trust me. You know what I mean? You're gonna reach a point where he's gonna say, okay, I don't have much equipment. I am losing. I don't know how many people are losing, and Ukrainians are losing as well. I don't have much money as before. So really, Also, I am fighting sanctions. I'm having better relationship with Iran and China, but still, you know, it's not fighting a war. You have no idea how it exhausts any regime, including a Putin regime. So when we say, okay, it's not going to happen, I say, listen, at a certain point, it will happen. This is what President Irina, this is what President said. And the best precedent I can look at the Iran-Iraq war. If you think, you know, Russia and Ukraine, they have problem, look at the problem you had between Iran and Ukraine. As a matter of fact, you know, Iraq used chemical and biological weapon against the Iranians. And Khomeini said, absolutely, I'm not going to agree with him. I'm not going to stop. But after 8 years, you know what I mean? They both came, they said, you know something? We are going to both proclaim, you know, we're going to win. And they stopped it. They stopped it without achieving really much. So they lost hundreds of thousands of troops, hundreds of thousands, not 1,000 or 2,000, hundreds of thousands. And it was, you have some kind of a ceasefire. And that ceasefire is still there.
Well,
and I think myself, listen, it's better for the Ukrainian. I'm not saying now, I am not talking in the present. I'm not talking now, but it's, listen, as someone who served in the Red Cross in Lebanon in the Civil War, if you have a civil war, who is hurting the much, Irina? It's not Russia. Ukraine is being destroyed more than Russia. You know what I mean? So,
of course, but the Ukrainians do also have their own visions of their own future. And as of now, they're not at that point. Whether they will change their mind later remains to be seen. But I agree with you that it would be better to put an end to the war sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, Western countries seem to want to prolong the war because they could have put a stop to Putin and his antics a long time ago by providing Ukraine with sufficient level of weapons to put an end to it. Not sending in NATO troops, not engaging in.
I follow you. I follow.
Unfortunately, first of all, there are many people deriving benefit from prolonging the conflict, as is the case with any conflict in general, but specifically here. There is direct benefit to some parties, which is why I think they will do neither. They will neither provide Ukraine with sufficient weapons to end the war right now, nor will they necessarily assist in any negotiating settlement. And quite frankly, right now, Ukraine would not agree to those conditions anyway. So there is no unity even in Europe or within the US on this situation. That's another problem. There is no concrete course of action. There are countries within the European Union and NATO that prioritize putting an end to Russia's geopolitical agenda, and then there are countries that are willing to compromise, and then there is a third set of countries that would prefer a particular outcome, but is, you know, but sways with the wind. So we are not going to see a concrete solution to any of that for a very long time. What happens next will depend on the next US administration, in my opinion, if the conflict continues up until that point. But right now, I just don't see that happening for the time being.
I don't see it myself happening in the near term also. But I think I really would like to see it happening sooner than later. And I think that any other administration and seeing what's happening in the world, really, which is really not benefiting United States, not in the favor of United States, they are going to start speaking about a negotiated settlement, where again, you know, where Ukraine, you know, it's gonna be satisfied, and Putin, you know, somehow, you know, kind of, I wouldn't say satisfied, but he would say, okay, it's better for me to stop.
Well, a lot of things can happen between now and then. It remains to be seen. But US actually created all of these problems by positioning itself in a weak position that has allowed authoritarian regimes to make these moves with complete impunity until it's too late, and then US is forced to take action. That is not a good position to be in. Unfortunately, if it keeps these foreign policies, every country will run and create havoc. China, Russia, Iran, you name it, is going to be able to do exactly the same thing everywhere. And what's US going to say? Well, we should reward bad actors by negotiating settlements because we failed to stop them beforehand. I mean, that's exactly
Yeah,
what they're going
but
to
this
say.
is what happened, Irina, in the world from 1990 to now. From 1990 to now, United States did some blunders. And today, United States has to be careful to be aware of the transformed global order. You cannot say, listen, I am living in the 1990 today. You are living in 2022, and 2022 is way different than the 1990. You have a very powerful China. We should not underestimate China. That doesn't mean, we have to let China do whatever it takes, but I won't provoke it. I will compete with it, and I will draw the line, and again, same with Russia. And let's not forget also, Irina, you have many countries now. And as a matter of fact, it goes before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Some of them called the BRICS, Brazil, India, China, and Russia. They don't want a unipolar world because they felt that. And this is where I believe that, one of the strategic mistakes that it did when United States unilaterally invaded Iraq. You know what I mean? You have many countries that said, listen, you cannot do whatever you want in the international community. And this is why today, as a matter of fact, somehow the position of United States, it's not that United States, its power has been reduced. No, United States still is the most, powerful country in the world, historically the most powerful, but also at the same time now, United States now cannot be involved as before in all disputes of the world. Why? Because you have now a number of countries, they are raising questions about United States, especially after Iraq. And let's not forget Afghanistan, which really it was a big, big blunder.
Unfortunately, all of these show it's not that the US shouldn't be involved, it's how it should be involved. What role
Exactly. Yes, I fully agree with that. And also, United States has to be selective in its involvement. Listen, I am an American citizen, so I care about all the rest of the world. But number one priority for me now, and always gonna be the national security of United States, how you are going to protect them. And from my own view, if United States is not strong enough, it cannot be benevolent, or it cannot play a more benevolent role in the world.
Well,
you know what I mean? So myself, I really think that United States, should be very aware, as to what's happening in the world, and to be involved selectively, not in all dispute. You can't be involved in all.
Sure,
You just can't. You know what I mean? And of course, this is what I think. Let me put it, since I'm speaking from a historical perspective. You look at the empire from Sumeria and the Middle East, to Roman Empire, which I really like to studying the Roman Empire, to today. You have three factors that affected the decline of the empire throughout history, and it's common denominator. First, polarization at home. This is number one. Second, debt at home, debt. Third, foreign involvement. These three factors, as a matter of fact, if you look at them, and especially if you look, especially at the Roman Empire, they are the one who led to the decline and then to the collapse of the Roman Empire. And these three factors now, they are at play in United States. We have polarization at home, which really we should work together. Second, we have a huge foreign debt, and that the ceiling of that debt is getting higher and higher. And third, we are everywhere. You have no idea. Irina, we have over 800 bases in the world. We are building drone bases everywhere, and it's costing us tons of money. We have more people now, in United States deployed throughout the world. Really, look how many drone bases we are building in Africa, especially in fighting terrorism. Let's not forget that. So United States really, from my
our
point
strategy
of view,
against counterterrorism strategy is another topic, which
another topic, correct? But my point is, this is my point. My point is, now today what happened? You cannot poke the bear with China and raise more tension with China when you have a problem with terrorism and a problem with Russia. Okay? All right? This is my point now. And for the Middle East, as a matter of fact, our policy should be, listen, we are with you, we are going to support you, and we are not going to leave you. And at the same time, hopefully the Western media will be less critical, especially, you know, regarding those, you want to call them whatever you want to call it, those rulers who would like to have better stability and better trade and more opening to the world.
Here's the problem. Number one problem that I think a lot of the more pro-isolationist inclined people forget, and that relates directly to domestic issues, domestic polarization. We may very well want to withdraw from the world or to limit our involvement, but that doesn't mean that the world wants to limit their involvement with us. We are seeing these domestic disputes with domestic polarization, and even the absolutely obsessive nature, politicized nature of our media. We are seeing foreign actors behind all of these things, playing on the inherent domestic issues and domestic distress, but also investing financial resources, human resources, and direct operational involvement. So clearly, none of these things. We may want to withdraw from these activities, but they're coming and knocking right on our door at home. And I think number one.
Irina, you have always a middle ground. Remember that. You have always a middle ground. You know, you listen, United States in its short history, 250 years, 300 years. Listen, we had the Monroe Doctrine. Let's not forget that. We had World War I. We had World War II. Then we had the Korean War, Vietnamese War, Iraq War, and Afghan War. You know what I mean? So mainly for those isolationists, we cannot be isolationist. And for those who would like to go and create democracy similar to us, again, it's not happening. So really, so my point is, listen, always a middle ground and see what you can achieve. Today, the world really is complex. And you cannot make a generic, you know, view. You cannot take it. Every country, every region, you have to know it. You have to know its culture, its politics. But the first priority you should know is that what's your interest and how you are going to protect your interest. And if you want to protect it, its ramification, you know, for the rest of the globe. And this is what I think United States is not doing well. And United States foreign policy now, I am worried about it. I have been worried about it since our invasion of Iraq, the mistakes that we done, because I've known about Iraq so much. And I say, why we are doing those mistakes? So really, I really hope, and that's my biggest hope for the Republican and the Democrat to be more congenial with each other. Let's work together. And our foreign policy, you need to be not isolationist and not, you know, so much involved in foreign affairs, and follow our national interest and support our allies. Support our allies and be aware what we can do, what we cannot do. We can do that. Now, it's gonna take time, yes. It's gonna take effort, yes. It's gonna take money, yes. It's gonna take a lot of efforts, absolutely, yes. But this is something, it cannot happen in a short time period. You mentioned that you are waiting for the new administration. I hope that whoever comes next, you know, they want to put their ducks in order and pursue, you know, a consistent U.S. foreign policy.
That's absolutely the case. The one big mistake was complete lack of strategy, complete lack of consistency, complete lack of defined interests, as you mentioned, and complete you know, half measurement and symbolism and virtue signaling, as opposed to coherent, resolute doctrine that allows us to define our policy, our interests, and our relationships. Unfortunately, we have yet to see any of that from this administration. We see haphazard efforts, but no real follow through, which was my concern from the very beginning. But this was a very, very interesting conversation. I look forward to reading your old books and to your new book coming out. Please keep me posted. I'm hoping to have another conversation with you
Thank you.
upon its launch. And
It's a pleasure, Irina. Okay.
And please keep in touch. It's
Thank
always interesting to talk with you. I look forward to reading your articles as well. Please share them with me.
Thank you, Irina.
when you
Thank you so
publish.
much. It's a pleasure to be with you. I hope I didn't give you a headache or clutter your head
Not
or
at all.
clutter the
It
head
was.
of your
I always
listeners.
enjoy a stimulating conversation, and
Thank you.
this was
Thank
nice.
you. And until next time, okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank
Have
you.
a good
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Irina. Thank you.
For everyone watching the Washington Outsider Report, we'll be back next week, Tuesday night at 9 p.m. as usual. Thank you, Dr. Rabil, for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.